This morning we have Dr. Francis Rolls, who's a medical practitioner, and Professor Guyatt, who was, until last summer, rector of the Royal College. Dr. Rolls, thank you very much for coming along and giving up your time to talk.
You want something about my past, don't you?
Very much, yeah.
Although we've been taught that the past is over and done with and cannot be altered, and the future is unborn yet, being the result of this moment and the next, of today and tomorrow, yet I feel inclined and great to take advantage of your generous suggestion, because I'd like to think that so fortunate has my life been that if I could only make better use of it, it could serve as a rehearsal to another, a better performance of a real play. The good fortune began at the start. From my father, I had the upbringing of any other citizen of the British Raj, for he had left his home in Romsey in the New Forest as a young man to take up a post on the staff of the Times of Ceylon. And so from him I got Stevenson, Kipling. Whereas my mother came of a prosperous American family, and from her I had the Uncle Remus stories, Nathaniel Hawthorne's Tanglewood Tales, and knew great chunks of Longfellow before I could read, from having her read them to me. So I was equally at home on both sides of the Atlantic, and had in fact shuttled to and fro from Ceylon to America twice before returning to school permanently in England at the age of 7.
After that, where did you go to university?
It was Cambridge University, just after the war, when the services people were doing courses up there, and there was a magnificent staff, a really high spot.
Must have been a very exciting time.
It was very exciting. It was indeed. The master of my college, Trinity, was Sir J.J. Thomson, discoverer of the electron, who'd come back a year or two before from his 5-year presidency of the Royal Society, and was typical, in my mind, of an absent-minded scientist who lived in another world. But there was nothing absent-minded about Rutherford, who was a powerful man whom I admired greatly, so that I went to weekly and quite intimate little group meetings he held in college. My director of studies was Adrian, and he was a continual inspiration. And afterwards, when I went back for a reunion dinner, he took me along to his laboratory and showed me on my own head the alpha rhythm which he and Matthews were at that time investigating. I attended the lectures of Hopkins, who had just discovered matter of an apparently different order in milk, which later became known as the vitamins, and of Langley, who was mapping out the sympathetic nervous system. At Eddington, I didn't meet, he was then professor of astronomy, having moved from Manchester University, where he had started work with Niels Bohr on the atom. I didn't meet him until he began to sing the song of quantum theory in public lectures everywhere, and urged on by Mr. Uspensky. I had a fascinating hour with him in London, during which I learnt a lot. But all this was really wasted on me, because I was simply engaged in having a good time. I had no academic ambitions, and yet perhaps it wasn't all lost, because being very social, I met my wife there. She was the main civilizing influence in my life. For instance, the whole world of music was completely hidden from me until she took my musical education in hand with her circle of friends up at Newnham. After university, I pursued my career as a medical student at Bath.
Up to that time, had you been interested in esoteric things at all?
No, not at all. In fact, I had shared rooms at college with the son of a physiology don who seemed to spend most of his time debunking mystics like Madame Blavatsky by conjuring and producing spirit photographs. Indeed, it wasn't until, as editor of the Bath Journal, I reviewed 2 books by Kenneth Walker, The Log of the Ark and On Being a Father, with which he was so pleased that our families spent all our spare time together, and we used to go down at weekends to his cottage in the Wild Brooks, Amberley. One time, he mentioned to me that there was a lecture being given by a man called Uspensky, his full name being Pyotr Demyanovich Uspensky, to whom we can perhaps refer for brevity, but with ever-increasing respect, as O. So I went along, not expecting anything much, but from the first, seeing his stocky figure coming in unostentatiously and sitting down in the chair with waiting for questions with a welcoming, well, I realized that because he never put on any sort of an act, that he was the first man I could really trust.
And after you had met Uspensky, what effect did that have on your life?
It rather changed it, because somehow it changed the direction of my ambition. But up to then, my career had seemed to be very promising. I was, by way of getting on staff of the teaching hospital and the specialist hospital at Brompton. But as it happened, we were to have limitations imposed on us all as consultants by the incoming of the National Health Organization. So I was quite reconciled to a second-class career well in advance.
What sort of man was he?
He was a very cultured man, intensely interested in poetry and painting, and on these magical evenings would recite much Russian poetry. And it was also a great pleasure to go to the Louvre with him, but he had very good taste. He came of a good Moscow family. His father was a builder, and his grandfather was a builder and renovator of cathedrals, church architect. He was editor of the Moscow newspaper Morning Star, and therefore met many people and knew everybody worth knowing. But the main thing about him was his determination to go for the truth at all costs, and his great personal courage. A couple of true stories may fill in the picture for you. After the revolution had been in progress about 2 years, he had occasion to go back to Moscow from Transcaucasia, where a lot of people were with him waiting to get out of Russia to Constantinople, in order to rescue some of his wife's belongings. And he would describe how important it was to be able to become invisible. There was he, a well-known man with a price in his head and a very distinctive appearance, having to walk the length of Moscow platform twice with the Red Guards there fingering their machine guns and rifles. And he said you could only become invisible by being perfectly natural. If you looked furtive or afraid or did anything unexpected, you at once attracted attention. A second example of his courage and determination was right at the end of his life. In August of his final year, he died on the 1st of October 1947. Madame Ouspensky wanted him back under her hand, and she had concocted a carefully laid plan for 3 people to accompany him on the Queen Mary. Their luggage had been put aboard. 2 cars had come down to Southampton, and by courtesy of the Cunard Company, we were allowed to drive right up to the bows of the Queen Mary. When people entered the car to try to persuade him to get out, he said, "I cannot go under these conditions." So when finally they said to me, "You'd better have a try," I went into the car and said, "Mr. Ouspensky, what do you want? Would you like to come back to line?" And he said, "Yes," greatly relieved. So 2 others leapt in with me, we drove off, waving goodbye and thank you to the Cunard officials, and leaving the luggage on board, not forgetting to stop and celebrate liberation at the village pub on the way back to Lion Place. He had previously explained to me what a man has to do in order to get through the barrier of death and achieve as full realization as possible. And it was entirely due to this decision that in the remaining 2 months he achieved that purpose, which he could never have done unless he'd been entirely free and with the required support. So that by his last morning, I saw him reach full liberation with my own eyes, and there were 3 other witnesses of this as well. Quite early on, after I got to know him, I used to have the privilege of sitting up with him all night with a certain number of others. We realized that this was a training, so that we would follow his train of thought and anticipate his needs without his having to express them. Once early on, I asked him what would happen if he went, who would take over. And he said, I do not see him now, but when I need him, he will come. And the same situation happens whenever a leader departs. Nobody is appointed, but somebody comes to fill a necessary position.
Was there any particular part of his teaching which attracted you very strongly?
I would say that the most novel part was his stress on the fact that you needed to know yourself. Self-study was an essential, self-observation. Until you actually experienced and knew your experience, you couldn't claim that anything you knew or heard was anything more than information, good or bad. Now this self-study had to be done in as quiet and as silent a state as possible. Only then would you be able to hear a guiding voice from within. It's not generally known that during the last 3 years of his life, he practically said nothing. Never a man who wasted words. After he'd stopped teaching large numbers of people in New York during World War II, he used to sit for hours with us in his study at Menden or in the studio in New York, and one had to understand what was needed and recall from memory what he wanted said. For instance, he might say, take meeting in New York, what should I talk about? activities of man, to chiefly crime. And one had to remember all he'd said about it and what one had oneself experienced in order to find the words by which questions could be answered, and then come back and be pulled to pieces, both by him and by Madame, but in opposite directions. Another reason for the necessity of self-observation and self-study is that only a man himself can know if he is conscious. It is quite possible to tell when someone definitely is not conscious, because there can be no conscious evil. Evil is always the result of ignorance and unconsciousness.
Professor Guyatt, you also knew Mr. Ouspensky, did you?
Yes, I did, but not so intimately. But I attended his psychological lectures. I was introduced to them way back in 1936, when I was really only 22, that sort of age.
Were you interested in esoteric ideas before that?
No, I wasn't at all, but I was interested in philosophical ideas, and it was through that a friend that I had at school introduced me to the lectures that Mr. Ouspensky was giving.
And what was it that impressed you about him?
Well, I was really struck dumb by him straight away, and I think what impressed me is what Dr. Rose has just said, and also that he gave a very convincing picture of the part humanity played in the structure of the solar system.
Yes.
He gave a reason for humanity, and this was extremely interesting.
If we come back to Mr. Ouspensky, he was married, was he?
Yes.
They should never have been married. They only got married because they were emigres, and it was only possible, really, to carry on their work if they were together. But there was never really a moment's peace for them.
Was there any particular part of his teaching which attracted you very strongly?
I think the psychological part, the fact that man doesn't know himself, that everything begins with self-study. Until you know yourself, you can't really know how a human being works, how it's meant to work, any more than until you drive a car, you can't know how a car is meant to work. And it's simply a question of what is meant by the strange consciousness, strange word consciousness. We all know, everybody knows that every 24 hours we go through three states: a waking state, a dream state, and deep sleep state. They don't know about a fourth state which makes everything different and everything possible. The fourth state is called Turiya, or enlightenment. On the way to that are things people know, like samadhi, but they're only transitional.
When you went down there and took part in the weekends, what did you actually do?
There was a farm, 30 or more acres, and garden. My wife took charge of the ladies in the garden, and about 40 people at the height came down at weekends.
Yes.
And the men worked on the farm, in the fields, and so on. Dr. we put in a pretty hard 2 days of work, and then in the evenings we sat up with him, a few of us.
Were you very close to him?
I think he was very glad to talk with me because I was a doctor, and many problems depended on a medical reason. For instance, Guyatt, in this book, which is mentioned, which is just out.
Yes.
Mentions that he had a very serious accident, a head injury, which meant the collapse of his work at the Prairie and Fontainebleau. This couldn't be explained at that time, but now, since it's been published, it has to be mentioned. And after that, he never taught the system at all. So Ouspensky was the sole end of that.
Yes.
Part of the history. And Ouspensky was busy handing on to me as a qualified man as much as he could.
Were you involved with the setting up of the house in London that Ouspensky ran?
Yes. I first of all met them at Gadsden in Kent, and then was instrumental in the purchase of Lyne Place in Surrey, where we lived through the war. My wife and family were great friends of Madame Ouspensky's family, so it was natural we lived together in that house. The whole number of children connected went out to friends during the war in the United States and were looked after and then returned to us safely.
Yes. And was your wife as interested in Ouspensky's teachings as you were?
She started by being furious with me for going out in the evening when she was pregnant with her second child, feeling terribly sick.
Yes.
But having got her through that, she was as keen as I was. She liked him, and Mr. Ouspensky admired her warm heart, a heart of gold, he said. But she was Madame Ouspensky's little pet. And so in her eyes she could do no wrong, whereas in Madame Ouspensky's eyes I could do no right.
Yes. It's said that they were very strict in their house. Is that true or not?
Which?
They were very strict with people who went down there.
Madame had a very strict formula, which she thought was the formula that Guyatt demanded. Actually, Ouspensky was closer to Guyatt in spirit than Madame. But it was very much a semi-religious institutional atmosphere.
Yes.
And when we took Aldous Huxley and his party down there, this offended them very much. He was shown into the big dining room at Lyne Place. Everybody was sitting like this. And he said, how dreadful, and never turned up again.
Yes. And was Lyne and the house in London, were they brought at the same time?
Just before Munich, Mr. Ouspensky got hold from the Russian ballet of the house at College Gardens, as it was then, and we redecorated it from start to finish, and he held some very interesting meetings there up to the middle of 1940,
yes,
when the bombing started. He used to attend them himself, and they were carried on in the different studios at the same time. And then the admirals commandeered it during the war for the naval exercises, and we got it back with considerable friction after the war, and they redecorated again, ready for him to come for his last few meetings. When when he was already a very ill man. It's all in the record, so we needn't talk any more about but his ideas are now coming into the picture very much. Recent scientific ideas that the universe couldn't have started by chance and been maintained by chance were very much what he taught. And he also taught the psychology that man never remembers himself. And the only things in his life that he remembers vividly are moments when he remembered himself. So all his teaching was directed to how to remember. And it was my particular province to try and find a man with a method which turned out to be what we call now meditation, and he showed me enough of it so that when I met 15 years later the Maharishi, whom you also know, in London, I was able to recognize the method as the one indicated. And we arranged meetings for the Maharishi at the beginning at a friend's house and college house and the Albert Hall. And the second year, I went out with him too.
With the Maharishi?
Yes, with the Maharishi. To the point, Rishikesh, where the Beatles got to later. And where the river Ganges comes out of the mountains. And there, the Maharishi invited the head of his tradition, which is the northern head of the non-dualism tradition, Advaita tradition, to come and stay. And it was there I made his acquaintance, this head, and immediately I saw him. He gave one the impression of being a really enlightened man. The Maharishi, whom you also met, appeared to be a little bit chancy in some ways. But the Shankaracharya, and you know him too, is the impression of knowing the answers. But I'd rather speak in terms of the tradition, because non-dualism is so important. Life is full of contending opposites, and unless one finds a way through, the difference between the two hemispheres, which see the same world but see it in opposite third.
You mean the brain hemisphere?
Yes,
left and right hemispheres of the brain.
And that's been known since the earliest Upanishads, because the shortest and one of the earliest says that by day one hemisphere looks outwards, one half of one's nature looks outwards and sees the moving and changing external world. By night the other comes in charge, is dominant, which looks inward and sees the source of consciousness within. Both are looking at the same world all day, but taking a different message, the one communicating in words and the other in the arts and music and the religions and so on.
And so
revealed religions.
You link this up with Sperry's idea of the right hemisphere, or non-dominant hemisphere, dealing with emotions and patterns and visual imagery, and the left hemisphere dealing with...
I think there was some evidence for that.
Oh yes, I mean that's well documented.
And of course a lot of the tangle in psychiatry is due to people not being able to reconcile the two.
Well, yes, it has a very checkered history. There's a lot of psychiatry.
And also the fact that the drugs affect both hemispheres, both the target. If you give somebody a tranquilizer, it affects both the outward-looking brain, but produces side effects which are individual and very incalculable on the other.
Yes.
So it complicates things.
Yes. If we can just go back to Mr. Ouspensky again. He handed College House to you. You took over from him.
He formed a society on which I was on the committee, which at that time was studying the transformism of man, psychotransformism. And when we got the house back from the Admiralty, we revived that society and made it under the Friendly Societies Act as a scientific society run by charitable donation, and called it the Society for the Study of Normal Psychology, because there were so many organizations studying abnormal psychology,
yes.
but nobody studying normal
yes.
psychology, by which I mean brains which could develop.
At the time that Ouspensky died, what do you think was his greatest contribution? If you were to sum it up and say, this was the thing which he's contributed to us, what do you think you would choose with all your experience?
I think I would say that as well as the three dimensions of space, listen to this carefully, Dickie, there were three dimensions of time. And there was not only time as a straight line from before to after, beginning nowhere and ending nowhere. He called that the first dimension. The second dimension was time as a circle, where the beginning and the end meet, and everything could be described as part of some cycle. The cycles of partly in the seasonal cycles, but also in repetition or recurrence in eternity. That is, not on the line of before, now, after, but on a vertical line of now. And so his main contribution, I think, is the introduction of the idea of three dimensions of time and of the importance of what are now called the subtle and the causal levels. Because man is not just a body of flesh and bones, but he consists of a mind, soul, will, consciousness. And if he learns how to manage this complicated machinery, then many things open up for him.
Yes.
It seems rather odd to be talking in this way about some future for psychology when there's this confrontation happening in the South Atlantic with the possibility of man blowing himself up. But
when you came to take over College House, were you very daunted with the thought that you now had to direct this?
It all happened so gradually. When he came back to England from America, having been there during World War II, he called me and another man and said, get me 300 people. And I said, well, right, how long have we got? He said 3 weeks, about. And what do we say to them? And he said, why say anything? Just ask them what they want. Well, we got 300 people, and he held those first meetings, and we carried on with what remained of that 300.
Yes.
After his death in 1947.
Now, you were talking about the main points of his teaching, and you were talking about the three levels of man. And you'd mentioned before that you had been introduced by the Maharishi to the non-dualistic teaching. Did you find these three levels of man that Mr. Ouspensky had shown you echoed in this teaching?
Yes, were absolutely essential to the understanding of his treatment, of his teaching. Almost every session mentioned the difference in time and space and management of these three levels. So that having learnt that from Ouspensky, and by the way, he wasn't the only one, in Sir John Eccles' Facing Reality, he mentions the three ways of looking at knowledge: physical, subtle or psychological, and causal. There was a time when scientists were interested in that threefold division.
Yes. And is this a line which you have been pursuing in developing College House?
I've been collecting and annotating with 2 or 3 other people, including yourself and Billy, the tape recordings of all the audiences we've had over 14 different visits to India. They've all been recorded, but they need arranging and indexing so that we find out what the best equivalent in English of the Sanskrit word is by his own descriptions and stories. This is what you did so well this last time.
Yes, good. I think what Dr. Rose hasn't mentioned and should be is the extraordinary way he kept Mr. Ouspensky's work alive for 15 years before he'd met the Shankaracharya. Was that tremendously difficult?
No, you did it yourselves by your continued interest and your questions. He always insisted that questions should be asked. If there were no questions, he would go. So all our meetings, questions were asked, and it was those questions that kept things going and continued interest.
Still, you were able to answer them and to develop Mr. Ouspensky's work, really.
They were also such frightfully nice people. I mean, the atmosphere, as you mentioned before now at College House, is one sort of forum where one could speak honestly without quarreling about things that interest them, and people could express their own views.
Did you make any changes in College House during the time that you'd been there?
Not really. Fundamentally not. We just kept the house, maintained the house.
I think you did make a change, Dr. Rose. I think I don't quite know how to put it into words, but you brought much more. You altered the atmosphere, and you brought much more love into it.
Yes, it was very stern and formidable.
It was pretty tough
my
stuff.
wife contributed greatly.
Yes.
You also introduced another method besides the meditation, the turning. You also introduced the turning to College House.
Turning?
Yes.
Yep. He and I always wanted to go to the reliable source. So when there was mention of dervish turning, it so happened that one of our people employed a Turkish boy on her farm and made friends with him. He invited her out, and she got the chief turner of the faithful in Istanbul to come and train the turners in London. He came 2 or 3 times and also started it in New York, where it's still a going concern. And so we feel that it is authentic, the turning we're teaching.
And do you feel that this is another stream in the development of man?
Yes, I think that some people don't get on with meditation and have got a very great deal from turning, because it's the one thing where you can't think.
Yes.
Thinking random thoughts are very much against the cultivation of consciousness. And in turning, you have to not think. You have to watch all the time. And it's very exhilarating. But you would have to ask somebody who's done more of it than I have.
Now the meditation and the turning and the lectures in the society are all designed to enlarge man's perspectives of himself and increase his own level of consciousness.
Yes.
What part do you think that personal experience has to play in this?
I think that personal experience is the essential, both according to Spensky and according to the head of this non-dualism tradition. That otherwise, what we hear and talk about is just information, good or bad. But experience is essential before it is realized, before it becomes part of one.
Do you feel that there is any value in people talking about the experiences that they've had? In fact, could I ask you a question, for example? Would it be a meaningful question to ask you, what sort of experiences have you had?
I don't think it's a good thing for the chap who's telling about his experiences. And I would rather just quote from the poets who do it so much better. For instance, W.B. Yeats. A lot of poets have had very bright moments of a new state of consciousness. And W.B. Yeats wrote this: "My 50th year has come and gone. I sat a solitary man in a crowded London shop. An open book, an empty cup on the marble tabletop. When on the street my gaze I turned, my body of a sudden burnt, and 20 minutes, more or less, I felt so great my happiness that I was blessed and could bless." And that's exactly how it's happened to us, I think. He certainly. Then that is self-consciousness. Cosmic consciousness is a stage beyond that, which a man like the Shankaracharya gets, or from which the Gospels, for instance, are written, or the Bhagavad Gita, where a man sees the whole human family, or a collection of people see the whole human family and its intrinsic goodness. And this is not for ordinary mortals. It's a very rare thing. But everybody, I think, has some experience of self-consciousness, which is measured by duration, intensity, and frequency. All sorts of degrees.
Can you monitor a person's progress by the number and frequency of the experiences that they have, do you feel?
I measure them only by the amount of satisfaction or dissatisfaction I see on their faces. One knows when they're still not quite there and they feel frustrated and dissatisfied, and then I think something extra has to be done for them in the way of explanation. But I do think now, since this last visit you made this summer, the remaining dark passages in the system have been cleared up, and that we're all right for the next 10 or 20 years if we survive the hydrogen bomb, nuclear bomb.
As you've obviously been looking after Collet now for a number of years, and you must have evolved within yourself the sort of direction that you would like it to go in. How would you sum that up?
I think the time has come when the discoveries of the sciences relating to man ought to be taken into account in education. The subject taught in the schools are really based on 19th century psychology. I think that such things as the alerting system, alerting big changes of consciousness, such things as the duality of the hemispheres and indeed the nervous system as a whole, and indeed the autonomic nervous system, which is left entirely out of account, so that when a person uses the word heart, he doesn't realize he's referring to the awakened autonomic.
And what you would like to see is that a synthesis of medicine and esoteric ideas.
Yes, and a concentration on the normal and less worry about the abnormal. I mean, they have to be looked after, of course, but it's the normal people, the people who would have to carry on for humanity, which need this latest knowledge and method of meditation. I don't think you can begin it without meditation, which is a way of producing quietness, peace, on all three levels: physical, subtle, or mental, and causal.
Ouspensky left you a search, something to complete in College House. Do you have anything which you would like to hand on of the same sort, a search which has to be completed?
I would like to say that Ouspensky didn't realize that we already had, every human being has a divine self, a spark of the divine self within them, whether they know it or not. Ouspensky's teacher denied this, and this produced terrible havoc for denial. With the head of the non-dualistic tradition behind us, we would like this taken into account in all our future programs. And the recent knowledge that scientific research has produced, which nobody is taking advantage of.
Looking back over your life, and judging it from a personal level, what do you feel are the most important things that you've learned and that you'd like to hand on?
This fact that within one is already developed and already in existence a hotline with the Absolute, a spark of the divinity which is the universe, which people like Hoyle and Schaeffer describe as the intelligence behind the universe. Intelligence is just a part of consciousness, but each of us have an atom of the consciousness, one element of the consciousness, which permeates the whole universe. This is the thing I want to hang on to, because there is a belief in some areas in the East that a man's last conscious wish determines his next life. I don't know whether there is a next life or not. I'd like to be ready in case, but the thing is that you have to begin a long time ahead, because you die from above downwards, and when your last conscious wish comes, you may be in a very sorry state indeed, and quite unable to decide what's good for you and what isn't. So everyone should begin now to try and decide what they want out of this life and go for it.
Do you have any personal tricks or personal things which you can do to, or that you practice, that can bring the memory of the divine spark back to you during the day? Have you any?
Just silence. There are moments during the day provided by nature when this is possible, but nobody knows about them and they pass them by. And every time we finish one set of motivations, one set of jobs, and the pause between that and undertaking the next, there is a pause when the mind is open, is free. If we pay more attention to those pauses and lengthen, so the present moment can be prolonged. This is another of Mr. Fenwick's teachings. A present moment can be a 10,000th of a second, or it can be 3 seconds, the time, a moment, a single breath, or it can be 24 hours, a moment for organic life on Earth. The biosphere, or a whole life of man, which it would be for the sun or some other bigger world. So it's the prolongation of the present moment.
Any tips on how you do it?
You just have to begin and go on and persist. It can't be described by anybody else.
Yes.
You know it perfectly well. We're only pretending in order to pull it out of me.
So lots of hard work to do. Finally, I think one of the feelings that you've had is that this life is a rehearsal of some sort.
Certain people get a chance of repeating a life of their choice. I don't know how true this is of more than a few people. Mr. Stravinsky used to say it's impossible for man to invent a theory of the future life which is wholly wrong. So there's some truth in any theory of the afterlife, because different people have different afterlives. Some disappear altogether, and so on. And I would like just to end up by telling a story which is shows that everything is so simple, really, compared with the complexity that we make of it. 3 men spent a lifetime trying to climb laboriously a wall. And when at last they succeeded, the first man laughed so much that he never came back. He jumped down and disappeared for keeps. The second man laughed inordinately. He laughed so that he fell down on the wrong side of the wall and suffered multiple injuries. But the third man laughed in a good-natured kind of way and came back to help his friend. But there is no wall. That's what everyone was laughing at. There's no wall at all.
Dr. Rhodes, Professor Guyatt, thank you both very much.